Here's my audience.
Hello.
Good evening, class. In a state of depression, pilot Andreas Lubitz deliberately crashed a plane of 150 passengers into the mountains. While this is a dramatic story, it's not completely out of the ordinary, and suicide is something that often comes into play with someone who has depression. In this case, he just happened to take other lives with him. The problem is that not a lot of people treat depression as if it's a real problem. Many people believe you can think yourself out of it, that people do it just for attention. But the reality is it's just as real as cancer. It's something that needs to be taken seriously and treated accordingly. The Depression and Bipolar Alliance support recently stated that around 14.8 million people in America alone suffer from depression every year. This isn't including other countries or even just throughout history. And so that makes it very likely that either you or someone you know has or will suffer from depression. I am one of those people. And this is why I devoted a lot of my college career to studying this, as well as other mental disorders and how to treat them. And I'm hoping that in the future, with my occupation as a therapist, I'll be able to help a lot of people overcome it. But this requires that people actually seek out help. And for that to happen, people have to know that it's a real problem. That's not something that can just go away over time. Today, I want to share with you 3 aspects of depression. 1, the symptoms, 2, the causes, and 3, the possible treatments. So let's begin with the symptoms. Some of the physical symptoms are loss of energy, lethargy, inability to concentrate, inability to take pleasure in activities that you previously enjoyed. This is typically one of the biggest warning signs. I know for myself that when I'm depressed, all I want to do is stay in bed. I don't want to read, I don't want to write, I don't want to go spend time with my friends, and those are all things that typically I would very much enjoy doing. There are changes in appetite and sleep patterns, unexplained aches and pains, as well as prolonged crying spells. And crying is a normal thing, but there comes a point where it crosses over the boundary of being normal. And the same goes along with the emotional symptoms of worry, anxiety, anger. And many people who have depression also have anxiety disorders. I have a panic disorder along with my depression, and those tend to surface a little bit later. There's pessimism, indifference, guilt, worthlessness, and reoccurring thoughts of suicide and death. And not everyone acts on those thoughts of suicide. Luckily, some people do get help before that becomes a reality, but that's not always the case. Since we've talked about symptoms, I would also like to talk about the causes. And in that, there are also biological as well as more emotional causes. It's very much something that can be found in someone's genetic history. It runs in the family. My grandmother has depression. My mother had bipolar disorder. So it was very likely that I would end up with one or the other. There's a chemical imbalance in your brain that happens with most types of depression, and you have these transmitters that are found in your hippocampus, which in someone who's depressed, it's actually a lot smaller than it should be. And they found that part of this reason is possibly because of a stress hormone that is actually found a lot more frequently in someone who's depressed, and it has a toxic shrinking effect on that area of your brain. And so you're not able to get the serotonin you need, or it just doesn't produce enough of it. And then other causes that aren't biological or abuse, medication, especially acne medication, is actually found to be linked with depression. I'm not quite sure why that is. Major events, social isolation, serious chronic illnesses, substance abuse, loss and grief. And it's not always a definite that someone who experiences these things will get depression. Grief is something that everyone will have to go through at some point, but other people just react differently to it. Some people can't find their way out of it. And since we've talked about the symptoms and the causes, I would also like to talk about the treatment. There's not really a cure for depression. It's not something that just goes away. A lot of times, if you can find it in someone who's young enough and get them on medication in time, you can get rid of a lot of the chemical imbalance, but that's very rarely the only source of it. And so there's still a lot of problems that they would need to work through, and it's not likely that it would be completely gone, but it can definitely be treated and taken care of over time. There's therapy in which you can do family, group, or individual therapy. All of them are good options, and a lot of people do different kinds of it. This is very much why I want to be a therapist. I do believe that it works, that talking about it is something that helps. It helps you develop appropriate and workable strategies versus what other people use. A lot of people use things like these, which are pain medication. They also use alcohol. I turn to self-harm. There are a lot of coping strategies that aren't appropriate for what's going on versus talking to someone. There's also medication, which should never be relied on by itself, but can definitely help. There are many different types of antidepressants that help with the chemicals and balance them out. And then there's also your physical health, which if you're getting enough sleep, exercising, getting the nutrition you need, and you have social support, it'll definitely make it a lot more likely that you'll be able to push through different spells of depression. And then finally, there's a spiritual aspect, I believe. Not everyone has the same beliefs that I do, and so not everyone can necessarily use this unless they decide to. But I found for myself that my biggest relief in depression has been finding God and knowing that I have a purpose in life, knowing that He loves me unconditionally and that He can do the impossible. And so I do find hope in that. And in Him, I've also found a great support system in the people around me. And that goes into what we talked about earlier. You need people. You can't do it on your own, whether or not you're spiritual. And so, in conclusion, depression is a very real problem. We talked about symptoms, we talked about causes and treatments. In 2013 alone, it was found that there was a suicide every 12.8 minutes. And this is something that I hope to change. And I hope that after today, you all feel a little more informed and that you're willing to go out there and express to people that depression is real and that people do need help. Thank you. Here is my audience again. Okay. Thank you.